So I thought we'd go ahead with the sashing, and I'm just finishing up joining my strips. We needed to cut quite a lot of strips to make a sashing because the sashing is joined. It's got 3 pieces in each sashing piece. It's got a plain, a stripe and a plain. So I'm just finishing off joining my last lot up, and then we can start cutting them into the lengths we need. So just with that 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you're doing a whole long strips like this, just be careful that things are feeding quite nicely. Sometimes things want to move a little bit, so don't stretch or anything. Just let the machine take the fabrics through together, and you should end up with quite a happy little result for a long strip, because you don't want them to be all buckled and different. And now we just need to press them, and I'm suggesting that we press them in towards the stripe so that the stripe sort of sits up as a little bit more dominant than the background. It doesn't really matter, but also it just means that when we're using another seam over here, that this seam isn't in our way when we're stitching the next one, because it's not a very wide piece of fabric there. So I like to press from the front side of my work. I feel I get a better press on the part that I'm going to see, and it just kind of sits nicely. So I would have it so that I'm just laying down the piece that I want, and then this piece just should flip quite nicely at the seam line for you. And I have to say, long strips are definitely easier on a longer ironing board. However, this is what I've got, so this is how it's going to work. So that's pressed that seam in towards the stripe. Because it's all narrow things and I want it to sit nicely, I'm just going to check the back and also just come back and give it a quick press from the back. It is all looking pretty good, but it's a good idea with something like this where it's small bits. You don't want the seam to be flipping from side to side, because it can make a difference on how things look. So that's looking pretty good. I've actually already done my other strips, so now I'm just going to show you how we're going to cut them and attach them to the blocks ready for the sashing part. So in the notes we've got some information on how to do the sashing strips, how to cut them. We've got some squares that we need to cut for the sashing posts, and then we've got our blocks here all ready to have the sashings attached. We're going to attach the sashing in segments to the blocks rather than working with long strips and doing it that way. I find that's an easier way to do things. So I've got two strips laid out here ready for slicing up. The instructions here will tell you that there's a couple of different sizes that we need to cut from here. So I'm just going to go ahead and just start cutting some of these. I find if I lay 2 at a time, I feel like I'm getting somewhere, and it's kind of easy. You could do more if you needed to do more, but 2 certainly works quite well. It sits quite nicely, and you can just lay things out and just move along your board, or if you've got a smaller board you can move your fabrics along, but for me that works quite well. So I've already cut some of that length, then I would bring them along, and I need to cut, as I said, a couple of different lengths. That's all in your notes, and I can cut some of those as well. So what we're going to do next is we're going to attach some of these squares onto the shorter lengths. So at one end of each of these shorter lengths we're going to attach one of these squares. So just as normal, the 1/4 inch seam allowance, go ahead and get those all ready so that we can attach things directly to the blocks. So we've got one of those ready. I'll give that a press in a minute. And we've got our blocks, whether they be our piece blocks or whether they're our plain blocks, it doesn't matter, they're still a block at this stage. And we're going to attach one of the longer strips down the side of the blocks. So all the numbers that we're going to work with are all written in your notes. I suggest that you have a look through those rather than me telling you every little detail, because it's a little bit confusing when you just hear it. It's probably better to read it and see it. Again, so just your 1/4 inch seam allowance attach the sides. And then I'm just going to give that a quick press, and this time I am going to press that into the sashing. And then with my other one here, which I also need to press, I'm pressing into the sashing. That was where I've attached that little square onto the end there. And so now I've done a sashing strip on the side of my block, and now I'm going to sew a sashing strip with a post to the underside of my block, so that we're basically enlarging the blocks, I guess, but it's including the sashing. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we can see how that's looking, and we can just continue on and do the rest of the blocks according to the instructions, because there's a couple of little things with the finishing side and things like that that you just need to be aware of. So you could pin this along if you like. I'm not good with pins. You could pop some clips in, or you can just feed it in and know that it's going to work. And again, back to pressing. I like to keep pressing everything as I go. It helps everything sit better, and I do tend to press from the right side to get that nice clean edge that I'm after. And so you can go ahead and do your sashing strip down the side and along the bottom of both the piece blocks and the ones that are just the fabric. So that we can then come back and join them together. And so in the notes it'll tell you that there's a couple of other things you need to do as far as attaching the squares, so that we can get the top edge of the quilt and that side done, because at the moment we're just working on the lower and left hand side. We need to be able to put those together. So all of that's written in the notes for you. So let's go ahead and put our blocks together. Hi, so I've put all the quilt top together, all the blocks together. We've still got the border to go, and I've just pinned it up here for the moment. You can see that we've got the sashing all attached. Everything's looking pretty much as it's supposed to look, so I'm pretty pleased with the way that's coming together nicely now. Now we've just got to make the borders. So in our notes we have some instruction here, and it's the same as we did when we were making these side points here for the stars. So the border is made up of lots of little units that are slightly wonky. Nothing has to match again. So it's exactly the same process. We've got the rectangle for the background. We've got some different coloured strips to go on at this time. So I'll just quickly go through it just to refresh you. I'm sure you know how to do it by now. Remember, we have to have it so that when they flip over, it covers the corner. It can meet in the middle or not, as you please. So stitching one piece on, and then I'm going to quickly press that. And then I'm going to stitch my next piece on, again just making sure that when it flips over it sits okay. And as I said, wonky is good, nothing's meant to meet. And as I mentioned earlier with the blocks, you could trim away the background corner if you wanted to. I'm going to leave mine there because I like that it makes it more solid and on the straight grain. So there we have that. There's the back of the block. You can see that the corners are well covered. It just needs trimming again, just the same as we did in the blocks. So I'll quickly trim that, and Then we've just got to join the blocks together, these little blocks to form the borders. And so the other thing I will mention while we're doing borders, because we're doing pieced borders, that means things are a set size, so that your quilt may have come out a slightly different size to what the calculations might be. And one of the things with piece borders is that you have to be a little bit aware of that to make sure everything's going to fit. But one of the advantages of these wonky shapes is that if you need to adjust a couple of seams to make it fit, then there's no problem, because nothing's meant to match, so nothing's a mismatch. So we've got some corner squares as well, so we've got to make up the border blocks to go on the quilt. So we're going to make the sides first, and they're longer than the top and bottom, and then we're going to make the top and bottom strips, so all the same sort of thing. They're just rows of these blocks joined together, and the instructions tell you how many to join together. And for the top and bottom rows, I'm suggesting that you attach one of the squares at each end of the row, so that we put the sides on first, and then we'll put the top and the bottom on, and they'll already have the corner squares attached. That's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead. I've made all my blocks already for the borders, and as you can see, some meet in the middle, some don't. Some have long sides, some have short sides. I'm very happy with that wonky look. Again, for me, it's that kind of twinkling look of the stars and things from the night sky. So I'm going to go ahead, join up my blocks, my blocks for my border, and attach my borders, and then I'll come back and talk to you a little bit more about what we're going to do next. So I've been putting my borders together, and I'm pretty excited with how it's working out. As you can see, nothing really matches. We've got some long points, some shorter points. We've going to have a few gaps between, and that's all as it should be. So you may want to measure your borders before you actually put them on, because now would be the time to adjust if you need to make any adjustments to the length so that everything fits. But I'm pretty happy. I've checked all mine and that they're going to work, so that's going to be my side border. And now on the top border, and all of this is mentioned to you in your instructions, the top border did need to have one of the pieces adjusted to make it fit, so I've simply made one of the rectangles into a square and done my corners on it. Now you could put it in the middle, you could adjust, there's lots of things you can do to make things work. But this is all going to work beautifully for my border up there. So I've already got my squares on the end for my top and bottom. We've got the one adjusted piece, which is mentioned in your notes, to make the border fit across the width of the quilt. And other than that, we're ready to attach those borders. How exciting is that? So here we are. I've put the borders on my quilt. I'm pretty pleased with the way it's all sitting. Everything seems to fit well together. One other thing that I did want to mention about the borders, which I forgot to mention before, was when you're joining the blocks for the border, to press the seams open between each little unit. Because we've got the extra bulk of the points on this side, it makes it quite a heavy seam to push one way. So I've pressed all mine open at that point, and I find that that helps everything sit nice and flat and where it's supposed to. So that's the quilt top made. I'll come back again in the next video and we'll talk about how we're going to do the quilting and the binding.